Today I'm going to be showing you how to make my special chili recipe. It's a recipe that I developed when I lived in Houston, Texas. It has a unique flavor to it. It's sweet, it's a little spicy. You can actually dial down the spice so it's not overwhelming. But it has a large list of ingredients, but you'll find that most of them are easily pantry like items that you would keep for other reasons. So it's not like you have to go grocery shopping for a ton of stuff. It's fairly simple and fairly cost effective. What you're going to need is about a pound of 80%, 80-20 ground beef. You can do grass-fed, which unfortunately I couldn't find today, but grass-fed's really good for this recipe. But if you can't find it, I mean, it's not terrible with the 80-20, trust me. You're going to need a little bit of olive oil, and that's just to soften the vegetables. It's not actually as part of the flavor profile. Ironically, I have never found a substitute for this. I use Jack Daniel's barbecue sauce as part of the flavor profile of the chili. I tried replacing it because, it has sugar in it and stuff I don't like to have in my diet, but wow, is it good. I use a jalapeno pepper. You can use a large one or a small one. If you're afraid of spicy foods, one great thing to keep in mind is you don't have to have it very spicy with a jalapeno. You can still have the flavor. Just take out the seeds before you chop it. I left some seeds in there because we do like it spicy. Then I have some garlic, 4 cloves, which I've roughly chopped. You don't have to chop them really fine because it's going to cook down. It's not going to be overwhelming. Then I usually get 1 medium, small red onion. You can do a large, but just don't do the whole onion. Do about 3/4 of it. It gets a little too oniony otherwise. Don't use the yellow onion. Don't use white onion. It's got to be the red for this particular chili. It just doesn't work. Typically I used 1 to 2 red, orange, or yellow bell peppers, but today I am varying it up because I had a whole bunch of these sweet mini peppers on hand. These aren't spicy at all. They taste a lot like bell peppers. They're just smaller and cuter. So I chopped about 2 cups of those for this particular recipe, but again, I usually go with a bell pepper. Then we're going to go to the seasonings. I use Montreal steak seasoning, which I didn't add to anything until my brother-in-law told me about it. And I find that if you make anything with ground beef, add the Montreal steak seasoning. It's really good. I do use a little bit of cinnamon. That was my secret ingredient, but everyone's asked for it by now that I've kind of just spilled the beans to everybody, so, not so secret anymore. Also, I use chili powder because it is chili. If you don't like it very spicy, you can also tone down. I'm going to use probably about 2 tablespoons, but you can tone down how much you use. Use maybe 1 tablespoon or 2 teaspoons. It depends on how spicy you like it. I use tomato paste in my chili because I like a thicker tomato paste. I don't like it to be overwhelmingly tomatoey, where it's really acidic. So I use the tomato paste and I don't use diced tomatoes. A lot of chili recipes call for diced tomatoes and like a tomato sauce. I don't do any of that business. That's crazy. Then you have your beef broth. I use less sodium because I like to add my own sodium as I go. I really don't like to have high sodium items on my flavor profile. Kosher salt has a better flavor, so I dial back the sodium where I can and then add it on my own. I use 2 types of beans, and they're always Goya because Goya rules. I use black beans and red kidney beans. This is pretty much how I roll with my chili. 2 types of beans, and they have to be Goya. And then, of course, kosher salt. Salt each layer very lightly, and it'll taste amazing. So I'm going to get started, and the first thing I'm going to do is turn on my stove, and I'm going to put it about medium heat. See if you can see that. I go up to 8, so I put it between a 5 and a 6. And then I'm going to use a little bit of olive oil to just kind of get the bottom of the pan wet. You don't need to use a lot, and it really, like I said, isn't part of the flavor profile. So just kind of coat the bottom a little bit. See that? Not much. And that's just so that you have a little bit of moisture to sweat out your vegetables. And then I'm going to put in the onion and the peppers. I'm going to start by sweating them out in the oiled pan. So I'm going to go ahead and add these, and I'm going to add a pinch of salt over them to soften them. And then we're going to move on to the next step. Really, all you want to do is just kind of get all sides of your vegetables coated with the oil and sweat them out. You want to soften them up so they're easier for people to eat, and you don't want to overdo it. You want to leave them a little firm because you want it also to be a colorful part of your chili. One thing I do is once I start cooking, I put a little bit of kosher salt into a dish so that I can get a little pinch of it and just season each layer as I go. And it keeps me from over seasoning because I'm only adding a very small pinch at a time. So just kind of get them coated and sweated out. Should take you about 5, maybe 10 minutes max. Now that the onions have started to caramelize a little bit, I'm going to add in the beef. Like I said, 1 pound is really all you're going to need. 80-20. If you really have an aversion to beef fat, then go ahead with 90-10, but don't go any leaner than that. It will taste horrible when you reheat it. And this is a pretty big batch. You're probably going to reheat. Again, teeny tiny pinch of salt, real tiny, and then about 2 tablespoons of Montreal steak seasoning. This is something my brother-in-law taught me, and it's amazing. So, that's pretty good. You want to break up your beef and kind of integrate it with your vegetables. It'll help keep your beef juicy and delicious. And you're just going to brown this and mix it in with the vegetables. While your meat is still a little pink but starting to get brown, that's right around the time that I will add the jalapeno. Like I said before, if you want to dial down the spiciness of the jalapeno while still keeping the flavor, you need to take out the seeds before chopping it up. And then 4 cloves of garlic roughly chopped. Also, don't worry about it getting overwhelmingly garlicky because it has plenty of time to cook down. The longer you cook garlic, the more mild the taste gets. Same with the jalapeno. So you don't really have to worry about it being overwhelming. This is going to be pretty mild as far as my chilies go. We're not going full heat. Just integrate them in and take a minute or 2 and let these flavors kind of settle in before moving to the next step. Once your meat is brown, you're going to want to move to the next level of flavor, and this is where my special additions come in handy. This is where I add my cinnamon, about a teaspoon. I'm just going to throw some in there because I'm a little pro at this. So I added about a teaspoon of cinnamon, 2 teaspoons if you really want to play up that cinnamon flavor, or if you're using a gamier meat such as deer or bison, use more cinnamon to take down the gaminess. Now I'm also going to add a 1/4 cup of the Jack Daniel's barbecue sauce. Like I said, I haven't found anything to replace it, and it really does add something special to the chili, like a smokiness, almost steakhouse flavor. And just add these, mix them in. Again, give it a minute or 2 to kind of absorb the flavor before moving to the next step. I refer to it as building my layers of flavor in my chili. That way when you eat the chili, it's very, very deep and complex. The next thing I've done is I've added my tomato paste, and I've dialed down the heat. I'm down to a 3 now. And that's because it's going to start cooking more slowly and kind of simmering into the flavor. And I just integrate that tomato paste. It will be tricky because it's very thick, but this keeps the chili from getting too soupy when you add the beef broth. So don't worry about it being too thick now. Just kind of integrate it the best you can. And as soon as I've added my tomato paste, the very next thing I throw in there is the chili powder. That way it has enough time to tone down a bit, but it also keeps the tomato paste from tasting tomato sauce like. You want chili, not spaghetti sauce. So, serves multiple purposes. So it's kind of in there. It's not perfect. But once I have it kind of mixed, that's when I'm going to start adding my beans. Drain the fluid first, and I start with the kidney beans because they take just slightly longer to cook. They're really hard to get out of the can. So I add the kidney beans first. And mix them in. Again, very thick, but you're going to be grateful for it later because it'll keep it from being really thin and soupy and runny. I don't like thin and soupy chili. It's kind of gross. And then I'm going to add in the black beans. And I'm going to cook that for another minute or two and just let everything kind of soften and get together. Okay, so everything is very mixed in, well integrated, and right before I add my broth, which is my final step before I let it simmer, another really small pinch of salt. The reason I do this before the broth is my broth uses less sodium, because like I said before, I like to add my own salt. I don't like to use very salty products. Typically, the recipe calls for 1 can of broth, but I just get the big box because I make this so much. So just be wary of how much you're measuring out, but kind of a pro at this by this point. So you're adding just enough to kind of make this into a thick, hearty stew or soup. 1 can will traditionally do it, or about 1/3 of the box. A little more if you like it thinner, less if you like it thicker, but you're going to need a lot because you have 2 types of beans in here. And then you are just going to simmer this for about 20 minutes, less if you're super hungry, but it won't be quite as tender. But about 20 minutes, it'll be really thick from the beans. And then you can serve it up with some cheese or some guacamole. Once you are done, I like to serve mine with some cheese and guacamole with some cilantro and crackers, but this is such a versatile chili. It's so thick and it holds up well. You can store it in the fridge for up to 3 to 5 days. The fat content helps it reconstitute better when you reheat it up. I stuff peppers with it. You can put it on your favorite burger or even make chili mac with it. You can also freeze it for up to 3 months in an airtight container. And like I said, the fat really does help when you reheat it. Don't be freaked out if you see some bright orange fat in it. That's from the tomato sauce dyeing the fat molecules in it. It'll integrate just fine back in once you reheat it. But this is my go-to chili recipe. If you try it, you'll probably see what I'm talking about. It is just really thick, hearty, and delicious summer or winter.